Okay. Can't stop myself from going. So this is episode 27.
Mm-hmm.
And this one we have a guest. But before we get to our guest, as I expressed to you, I have a bit of a dedication, and I would be remiss if I did not do this.
Okay.
So my last week. So this has been my last week. Okay, I'm just going to
Okay.
give some background. So when my dad was alive, he was actually a basketball referee for 50 years, in addition to his regular job, right?
Okay.
So he was a player above state. He became a referee. He loved it, loved it, loved it. Loved the game of basketball. College, not pro. He was not a pro fan. He thought all the talent was in college. And so we kind of grew up with that. And we grew up watching games. We grew up knowing all of his referee friends, of which there were many. Our families, interacted with each other. We knew their kids, like the whole thing. So my dad, probably his best friend in that group was a man by the name of Bob Miske, who actually, here we go, who actually eulogized my dad when he passed away.
Hmm.
And so they were friends for a very, very long time. And he was great. I knew him my whole life. Knew him my whole life. And he was funny and the whole thing. And so Mr. Miske hasn't been doing so well for the last few years. He's in his late 80s. And so my mom and I would talk, and she's like, oh, Bob's not doing so good, falls, breaking stuff,
Yeah.
in and out of ICU, in a rehab unit, back to ICU, all the
Yeah.
things that happen as people get older. And so last week, my mother had called me and I didn't get the call, and I called her back. And when I called her back, she was crying, she was upset. And I was like, oh, it's got to be Mr. Miske, right? Like this has to be it, right? And she said, I've gotten terrible news, horrible news. And I was like, okay, mom, just like let me know what it is. It was not Mr. Miske. It was his son, David, who was 55.
Oh.
So on October 6th, David Miske passed away in his sleep at 55.
Mm.
And so this past Thursday, I was at the wake and the funeral for David, who I'd also known, since I was like born. I
Sure.
hadn't seen him in years, but like, he went to Amherst Central, which is right down the road from me, um, and so I was at his wake and funeral. Mr. Miske was there, and he was in a wheelchair, and I was like, oh gosh, like, does he really even know what's going on? It was just awful because it was not what anybody expected at all. And so, I leave that funeral and I'm like, oh, especially when it's a funeral for someone who's around your age. That was my first one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it
That was my
was?
first
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And I was like, oof. And so a couple of days later, I talked to my mom. This was on Sunday, and she said, Mr. Miske is in the ICU. Like, he fell again. His heart rate is 30.
Ooh.
And I was like, okay. And she texted later on to say that they were not actively treating him anymore. They were keeping him comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by Monday morning, he was gone.
Yeah.
So now I have Mr. Miske's funeral on Friday.
Mm.
So we have a father and son who passed within a week of each other.
Yeah.
Now, when I was growing up, I knew that Mr. Miske, as a kid, I knew, like, he was good friends with my dad. I saw him all the time. I knew all the referees that did games in the Western New York area because they were all my dad's friends. And when I was in high school and a cheerleader, I knew every ref on the court because they had been in my house. They were my dad's friends. Like, it was
Sure.
just how we grew up, right? And I also knew that Mr. Miske had been he had been a baseball scout for years. I mean, he scouted for the Yankees, he scouted for the Dodgers, he scouted for the Mariners. He had 2 World Series rings. And he had this, and he loved the game of baseball as much as he loved the game of basketball.
Okay.
So today I bought the Buffalo News, which I don't get the Buffalo News, and I bought it today because I knew his obituary would be in it. And so I opened it, and his regular obituary was in there. But then in the sports section was an article written by Mike Harrington, who's a sports writer for the Buffalo News. And Mike Harrington is also my godparents' nephew, which is kind of funny. And I read this article and I was blown away
Wow.
by his life. I mean, like his accomplishments that a lot of people could never lay claim to.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I mean, like he was in 8 halls of fame, like baseball, basketball, scouting, roughing. He was heavily involved in the community here, with sports. And like I read this and I was like, holy shit, like this is the guy that would just drink with my dad. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but he had this incredible career,
Yeah.
that I really didn't know anything about, and that warranted a separate piece in the Buffalo News
Mhm.
about his life. And it was and the thing that makes me so sad is that the person who should be eulogizing Mr. Miske on Friday is his son,
Yeah.
and that won't happen. So I would, like I said, I would be remiss to not in some way dedicate this, mention this, like, I mean, because I mean, growing up, he was a big part of my life, big part of my dad's life, and really big in this community, like
Mm-hmm.
sports wise. And so I even made my son read the article. I was like, Peter, you have to read this. I'm like, holy moly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the quote that I had for today, see my new segment on quotes,
Mm-hmm.
it's an African proverb, which is when death finds you, may it find you alive.
Mm.
Which of course, some people would say like, well, of course it's going to find you alive because you're not dead yet. That's not the point, people. The point is, may it find you living,
Mm-hmm.
living
Mm-hmm.
to your greatest extent, right? To giving back, to not just existing.
Right.
And with his life and when I read about and when I knew of him just personally, like that was someone who lived
Yeah.
and lived well. And that kind of like wraps into like our whole point with this podcast of living out loud and living your best life and finding the way to live your best life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Leaving something behind,
Oh, for sure.
right? Touching lives,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yep.
you like
Absolutely.
my mom and I had a brief conversation about, she was like, oh, well, because David's funeral last week, there was a shit ton of people there mostly because of his age and just
Yep.
like shock.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can't even imagine the number of people that are going to be at Mr. Miskie's.
Yeah.
And like, what a tribute.
Yep.
I mean, he worked for the Bisons, the Yankees, the Mariners, the Dodgers. He worked with young refs. Like, I mean, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think it'll be that big." I'm like, "Are you insane?" I'm like, "Do you have any idea how many people he interacted with
Mm-hmm.
who probably regard him
Oh, sure.
very highly?"
Yeah.
I was like, "This is going to be like standing room only." So there's a little nugget for everyone. You want your funeral to be standing room only.
Yeah. No pressure.
You want it to be standing room only because that
Mhm.
means that you did something good.
Mhm.
Okay. So this also kind of plays into our guest for today, who has a story that I've already heard, and I'm gonna not say a word and not be a spoiler alert. That again, living living your best life and
Mhm.
finding a way to live your best life. So, Stephanie, if you would like to come and join us now, you may. There she is.
Hi.
Hi,
Welcome.
Hey there.
welcome. Welcome,
Hey,
welcome.
thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh, I
Um,
love it. I love it.
I saw one of your episodes and I was really I was tickled because I love the conversation and the authenticity and the fun that you two were having, and you had me laughing, and I was kind of cracking up like I was in the conversation with you, and I was like,
Good.
this is amazing. So I love this platform and what you do and what you talk about. I think it's fantastic. So kudos to you. So I think you really do touch people in a meaningful way, and that's
You,
important.
Stephanie.
So,
Well, okay, so I just want to give like a little bit of background. Stephanie spoke to a group at work where I work, in kind of like a specialty group that we have. It's called like, it's like a wellness group, right? And it was part of, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And as soon as I heard her speak, I think it was like 10 to 15 minutes in, and there was like a chat going on. And I was like, I need Stephanie to come on my podcast.
She was texting me during the thing. She's like, oh my God, this
Really?
woman. And I'm like,
I
what's
was.
going on? What woman?
I was. And the moderator, who Stephanie, personally, she messaged me separately, and she was like, oh, let me reach out to her and see if she'd be open to that. And I was like,
Yeah.
I just shamelessly put myself in the chat. Like, okay, like, let's see. And Stephanie graciously agreed, like almost immediately. And then I gave you the link to our last episode, and that's when you said, like, yes.
Oh no, she watched the last episode that we did?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
the Lucille Ball quote.
Oh yeah.
And
Yep.
I mean, there was so much good stuff in there. I was like, I'm learning stuff.
Validation on the Lucille Ball quote.
That's right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
quickly, Katie is a licensed mental health counselor. So she's the brains of the outfit, and I'm just the comic relief, like, over here. And Stephanie, you can, if you want to give your professional title, you can. You give any information about yourself that you want to share, and I'm going to give the floor to you.
Okay. Well, I'm Stephanie Legree Roberts. Professionally, I work at Texas A&M University, Central Texas, which is all the way in Killeen, Texas. And for those who need a little bit of orientation, it's near Austin. we always go near Austin. And so we are one of the sister schools of the A&M system. And so we're not the Aggies, but we're part of the same system. And so, at the university, I work as the executive director of student success, and I'm also the associate dean for my program. And so a lot of the work that I do is about supporting students outside the classroom with everything they could possibly need, tutoring, resources, advising, community resources, access, those types of things. And so the work that I do is very meaningful for me in so many ways, because the way Ella and I met is because I was actually speaking to a group at WGU about how educators in higher education can actually impact and support victims of domestic violence, how to identify victims, or to identify patterns, or people might be affected or impacted by it in some way, and how education can be a lifeline in so many different ways, and how educators, whether they teach in the classroom or they work in a student life office, or advisors or counselors, when they come in contact with students, there are things that they can do. Sometimes small things, simple things, sometimes big things. It depends on what it is, to help people who are going through this. And so it was an honor for me to be asked to speak to your group, and then to see all of the comments and the feedback and some of the shared stories. And it always reminds me that domestic violence touches people everywhere. It's not just in the month of October. And here we are talking in a sort of a closed group and agreeing not to record. And we're talking to, I don't know how many people were on the call. And we're talking about how they can help other people and help other students. And then they themselves, you discover, are also some of them very direct victims of this very thing. And so it just reminds you of how prevalent it is, and how important it is to be mindful of it all year, every day, not just during this month, which I think sometimes it does get buried at sometimes because there's so many other months. I think you guys had talked about it one time. You talked about Breast Cancer Month and all these other months.
Yeah. What should we be aware of now?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I feel like people live with this on all levels. And sometimes they misunderstand and they say, oh, domestic violence it's between a husband and a wife, or somebody's being physically beat or something. And no, it's so much more multifaceted than that. It affects everyone on so many different levels. And there's so many myths about it that I wanted to be someone who could speak to that, but then also share my own story and my own experiences with it, because for me, it's therapeutic in some ways. So it's not completely selfless. People are like, oh, you talk about this and you help me so much. Like, me talking about it helps me also, and so I think it's important. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about it, but at the same time, I know that it touches people in a very important way. And so for me, my story, it's interesting. You talked about the story you just shared earlier, in someone talking about living well. My mother actually used to say that all the time. And actually, she used to say it too much that it was actually very annoying at times, because she would just use it as a way to just get us off of her back about things. And we'd say, hey, Mom, we don't have any milk for the cereal. And she goes, living well is the best revenge. And like, what does that, what does living well, what is that? And she would say it all the time. She heard it somewhere at some point, and that became her go-to. But I got to tell you that it had more meaning for me years later than ever before. Talking about living well, talking about living life while you have life in you, kind of a thing. And what did you say? You said, when death finds you, may it find you alive. And man, that has so many layers to it for me.
Yeah.
And you were talking about having a story and telling your story, and when you have your funeral, you want to have standing room only, and it just kind of had me going and thinking, because I think about my mother, who was a victim of domestic violence, lost her life to domestic violence, and didn't really get to live the life that I believe she was meant to live. Didn't really get to live up to the potential that she had, but still, in her own way, managed to leave a legacy behind in me and my siblings, teaching us to be resilient and to find unique and innovative ways to care for ourselves and stay alive in a situation that was very pretty much tenuous all the time. And it sounds almost counterintuitive. You say, well, she taught you resilience, she taught you, but why were you in that situation? And that's a whole other episode. but for her, I feel like my story is actually her story, or the story that maybe she should have had. Do you know what I mean? And so when I think about it and I tell my story, I start by telling folks, well, I grew up in a small town, in a small town called Pleasantville, New Jersey. We weren't really poor, but we weren't quite middle class either, and we struggled a lot. My father was a raging alcoholic who had so many problems, so many issues that I didn't fully understand until I was an adult, and out of the situation where it really became clear to me what was happening with him. And he was violent. And it's very much, I tell people all the time, and I look back on my life and I look at different situations, things that happened in home. It felt like we were watching a television movie. Something you see on TV, you think, oh, that doesn't happen in people's houses for real. That's like one of those scary TV shows or those things you see on Lifetime, when women are in danger, things like that. No, these things are real. He was unpredictable. He was dangerous. He was suicidal, but he was also the type of person who was somewhat selfish and narcissistic. He wanted to have full control all the time. And we pretty much lived like prisoners in our own home. My mother was dynamic and smart and funny and sassy and cool and hip and all of these amazing things. And yet around him, she shrank. And she was just there to be whatever he wanted and needed her to be when he wanted and needed it. And we suffered a great deal at his hands, and it was frightening. And I explained, in the presentation, I talked about it a little bit. Even though it was frightening, and every day you were uncertain, and you didn't know if he was going to come in and start breaking things and slapping you around, or kicking you, or hurting the dog, or doing horrible things. He'd turn off the electricity and turn off the switch and breaker board and make us stay in the dark. He'd do just random, angry, horrible, heinous things just because. Despite all of that, there were pockets of times where it felt like we had fun, you know, like we were a family, like there was some sense of, there was sort of a pocket of normalcy mixed in. Um, and that was probably because we also didn't know that what we were going through was not normal, was not the norm, was not what every family dealt with, you know. When I used to watch television, my brother and sister, we watched television and we watched family shows like the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family and things like that. We thought those were fantasies. Like people don't really live like that, you know. Mom and dads don't have fun and take the kids on trips and things like that. And dads don't sit down and have real conversations with you and teach you lessons about life. That's not how it really works. That's just fantasy show. Um, and then it's not until as you're getting older and older and you start to become more aware of how things really are that you realize, okay, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. And now we're stuck and we're trapped and I don't know what to do. Um, there were really, really high highs and there were really, really low lows. But as I got older, um, I felt like I had no options. I felt like I was trapped. Um, I felt like I couldn't leave and I couldn't get out of the situation because my mother didn't want to leave and she couldn't get out of the situation. So I had to be there to protect her. Um, I think all throughout my childhood, I lived in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. You know, you'd come home after school and you'd have to get home very quickly. And I had to grab my brother and sister. You had a routine. And then as you got closer and closer to the house, you always had this trepidation of, are we going to walk in and he's not there and everything's okay, or he's sleeping, or he's passed out drunk, or are we going to walk in and he's beating her, or she's screaming, or she's got a cast on, or a bloody nose, or a broken arm, black eye, something. We don't know what we're going to see. And so it's not till you get into the door that you're like, oh, you assess the situation and then you go into your routine. You know, we had everything from a secret language, and even the kids in the neighborhood would give us a heads up when he was coming home and they'd see his car, you know, things like that. You'd throw the basketball against the back window and be like, your dad's coming. And like, you know, so it was that kind of living um, that basically had us paralyzed for majority of my childhood. And it wasn't until I was about 18 um, that my mother and I were really getting into it a lot. And I was very frustrated with her, but I was also very depressed. I struggled. I fell out of high school. I wasn't able to get my mind around what my life and my future was supposed to be. They're talking about going to college and getting out on your own and getting a job and things like that. And I'm thinking, how are we supposed to do that? How does that work? Um, and having conversations with my mother and having her, seeing her now as I am a woman, seeing her as another woman and thinking, what are we doing? What is this? What are you doing? Why is this happening? Why are you not leaving this man? Why are we here? Being angry at her and frustrated with her because I felt like I couldn't have a life without her. And her, a lot of the times, even when I told her I was leaving, begging me to stay and we'll figure it out and don't leave her and those kinds of things. I mean, there were so many layers to our relationship and so many things going on there that made it almost impossible for you to even think of having a life outside of that bubble. Um, and as we had more and more of those conversations, she started to be more and more confident that maybe we could make it. Maybe we could get away. Maybe we could do some things. Because there were a lot of things that happened over the years where she tried and then went back to him, or tried to get him out and then let him back in. And, you know, and so it just seemed like a vicious cycle that was never going to end. And I told her, I don't think I could do this anymore. And especially since his violence started to get even more so, his frustration with me was very, very obvious. He didn't want me talking to her about these things. And now that he saw me and I saw him for what he was, he needed to get me out. And he tried it several times and she would beg him, fight him, and all these things. And so I said, okay, at this point, I can't stay. And she's like, okay, we're going to leave together. We're going to do this together. And so we had a plan. We started talking about it. She started getting her confidence up. Um, he was on the decline and we figured, okay, he's not the scary monster he used to be. We could take him, you know, kind of a thing. And we were so close and ready. And the only thing I can think of is that he sensed it. He knew it was coming. And he decided that that was not going to be, that was not going to be a thing. He had been doing some of his normal routines and being messy the way he always was. And she worked at a casino in Atlantic City because Pleasantville is right near Atlantic City. She worked at night. And she would catch a cab and go to the casino shuttle area, take the shuttle and go into the city and go to work. And on numerous occasions, he would pretend he was going to come home and drive her to work, and then he wouldn't show up, or he would do things to try to prevent her from getting to work, those kinds of things. And so one night we were having a crazy snowstorm, and everyone was talking about it, and they were like, it's going to be a blizzard, it's going to be this, going to be that. She got ready for work like she normally does. He didn't show up like he said he was going to show up at 11 o'clock to take her to work. So she did what she always does, and she called a taxi cab. She gave me all the instructions she needed to give me for the next day, like she always did for my brother and my sister, what we needed to do. Got in a taxi cab, said goodbye, and we never saw her again. So many things happened at that point, including my father disappearing for the full 24 hours that she was missing initially, coming back home just pissy drunk and crazy and stumbling all over the place, screaming all kinds of obscenities. And I'm trying to tell him, Mom didn't come home from work today. She left last night. She didn't come home from work. I need you to help me. And I've been calling the job, and they said she never showed up. Do you know where she's at? Him crying, threatening all kinds of things, waving the gun around, just falling out, doing all kinds of things, and then telling me she left. She was cheating on me and she left. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Mind your business. She left, crying, acting up. It was so scary. And then the next day, crazy snowstorm. We had like it was like ridiculous amount of snow. We were snowed in. And she was nowhere to be found. My brother and sister are standing at the front door, faces pressed against the window, looking down the street where we normally see her coming home from work, and she's not coming. I start calling the hospitals. I called the police a couple of times, but I was so afraid to tell them that I wanted to do something official or formal, because he kept telling me, she's gone, don't worry about her, she's not coming back. And it was just messy. 3 days in of her being gone, he took all of her clothes, everything she owned, jewelry, clothing, everything, threw it outside on the curb for the trash. He threw pretty much everything that she's ever had, every clothes, shoes, purses, bags, makeup, jewelry, everything out of the drawers, and just threw it on the curb on the sidewalk. And whatever wasn't just out there damaged or picked up by the trash, people took. And I knew I was in trouble at that point. I had a part-time job at a video store. I told my boss at the video store what was going on, and she was like, you have to call the police. You have to say something. How long's it been? And I was like, it's been like 3, almost 4 days. And she's like, okay, no, that's not like your mom. You got to call somebody. You got to do something. So she called the police for me. Police showed up. He was horrified when the police showed up at the house, and I was scared to death. And he basically gave them a statement and said, no, my wife left. She left me. She was cheating on me. She left me. And we're standing in the background, and the officers are looking at us, and they're like, do you know what happened to your mom? What happened? And he's looking at us with that look of like, you say something, and I'm going to break your neck when these people leave, And when they did leave, he pretty much put a whipping on us. He threw my brother down the stairs. He punched and kicked me. My sister was screaming. He threw her against the wall, and he told us that we needed to get over it and get behind the situation. She's gone. She was a no good, this, that, and the third. She's gone. His mother, my grandmother, came over, always a supporter of his, even when she knew my mother was being tortured and beaten. She started doing what she normally does, which is bad-mouthing my mother, talking about the situation. She's gone. She left this, that, letting us know what the new rules and the new order is going to be. My father, of course, coming in and out for those last couple of days, just drunk, lost, scary. Police not really being helpful in any way, saying, oh, it's the snow and we'll have to wait. And your dad said she left. And was your mom cheating? Did your mom have a boyfriend? Those kinds of things. So nobody was really trying to find her or solve the mystery of where she was. And it was such a surreal time for us that I don't know, it was a blur. He ended up a week after that, a week and a half, he says, we're moving to your grandmother's house. So he makes us pack up all our stuff and we move out to my grandmother's house. And that was a nightmare in and of itself, because nobody was doing anything about the fact that our mother left for work one night and never came back home. And they were just acting like this was just how it was going to be. And so I guess you can't really call it running away, because at that time I turned 19. So I just left and I went to a friend's house and I said, I'm in trouble and I don't know what to do. So her parents attempted to try to help. When the snow finally melted, it was about a week and a half in, 2 weeks in, detectives came around, we talked. The detectives started to ask him questions and investigate and all of those things. And a whole host of things happened in between that time. Long story short, I was never, they never found the trail. They never got the information they needed. They didn't find her. They attempted to put it on him because they felt like that he had definitely done something. And I had one detective in particular who was certain he had done something. They had information, they had some witnesses, they had some things, but not enough to hold him. I think he had been called in 2 or 3 different times. And then eventually I met with a district attorney who told me they didn't have a case. And he told me, in fact, my father, when he was brought in, blamed it on me and told them that he thinks I did something to my mother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was like, okay, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Fast forward, a lot happened during all of that time. Trying to stay connected with my brother and sister who ended up in foster care, then back with my grandmother who proceeded to continue to abuse them, and neglect them. Trying to take care of them, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, trying to figure out how I was going to do with myself, and finding myself in very precarious situations because a lot of people who said they wanted to help really were out to exploit, and take advantage of me. And so I found myself in a lot of precarious situations, doing a lot of couch surfing, doing a lot of things that was always putting me in a situation where things weren't stable. And so I really didn't feel like I had time to grieve, you know. Something snapped in me too, I swear. Once I realized that she was gone and she wasn't coming back, and I felt certain he had done something, I don't know. I woke up out of this fog that I had been in. I felt like I had been walking around with anchors or weights on my ankles or something, and all of a sudden I felt like, okay, no, I've got to step up. I've got to take care of my brother and sister. I've got to get my life together. I've got to find my mom. I got to do this for her. And I went into a strange survival, I don't know, mode full of energy. I ended up getting like 2 or 3 jobs. I was secretly sending my brother and sister money. I was secretly buying them school clothes and birthday gifts and trying to comfort them and take care of them. I rented out a small room. I decided I wanted to go back to school. So even though I was trying to get my GED, I decided to get my high school diploma from a correspondence school. And back then there was no computers or internet. So you literally wrote out your assignments, put them in envelopes and mailed them, got the grades back and followed the information. And I finished high school that way. For the next year and a half to almost 2 years, with no word from my mother, just drama, drama, drama. I found myself longing to want to go back to an original desire I had, which was to go to college. Back in high school, they would make you fill out these little forms and these little cards, and you mail them out to all these different colleges. They had them on a bulletin board, and these colleges would send you these booklets and these packets. And I got all these booklets and these packets, little catalogs, and there was one catalog I just fell completely in love with. They had all these beautiful pictures. There was a library. There was a lake and a pond with ducks and all. And I'm like, oh my God, I love this place. Now, what's going to really get you about this place is that it was Pace University. They had 3 campuses. One was in New York City. One was in a small town called Briarcliff. And there was another one, the one with the library, was in a town called Pleasantville, New York.
Wow.
And I was like, this is crazy. And I thought that was the weirdest thing. Here I am living in Pleasantville, New Jersey, longing and looking at a place in Pleasantville, New York. And I'm thinking, for me, I'm like, this is a sign. I got to get to this school. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to get to this school. I really didn't have the confidence to think I could do it. And I ran into someone who used to be a counselor at my old high school. She had read about what happened in the paper. She asked me if they ever found anything. I told her no. We had a long talk, and she encouraged me. And I told her, I can't leave my sister and brother. I got to stay here. And she was like, you can't help them where you are right now. You're renting a room. You're working 3 jobs. You can't help them this way. You got to go. You got to go to school. You got to go to college. You got to find a way to get yourself into a situation where you can be helpful to them.
Yeah.
She's like, I know you feel like you're leaving them, you're abandoning them, but you can't get to them where they are now. And the only way you're going to be able to help take care of them is if you take care of yourself first. And so I took her advice. I wrote an essay and I wrote to that school. Surprisingly, they actually wrote back. And someone said, the letter you wrote was fantastic. We are so enamored with what you have told us. We would love to talk to you. So they told me to call. I called them. I spoke with one of the advisors. We had a great conversation. I bawled my eyes out talking to her about what was going on because I don't think I'd actually fully I'd not spoken it to people, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Outside of my little bubble before. And so there was a sense of embarrassment and shame, but also guilt and also relief that I could hear somebody else saying to me, I feel you, I hear you, this is breaking my heart, I care about you, because nobody was acknowledging that my mother was gone. There was no funeral, there was no grieving, it was just, she was just gone. And nobody said anything or did anything. And so that was the first time in that conversation that I got to breathe in, say, my mom is gone and I don't know what to do. And it was amazing because she was the most comforting and caring person. And she did it in such a way where she didn't shame me. And she told me that she thought it was kismet that we were talking and that we were meeting. And that she said that she was going to advocate for me because the essay that I wrote, she says she can't stop reading it. She loves it. She says she shared it with so many other people up at the college. She says, we want to possibly maybe even give you a scholarship.
Wow.
And I said, are you serious? And she says, I'm serious, but it'll be, you'll be conditionally enrolled. We've got a lot of work we got to do, but she says, but I think you can do it. And so we talked some more, and she told me that there were going to be like a series of, aptitude tests and things that I would have to take, and there'd be some other things that I have to do. And then I think maybe our third conversation or so, she said to me, she says, so listen. And she told me honestly, we are a private institution. We're up in Pleasantville, New York, which is near a town called area called Westchester, New York. We do not have a lot of students of color here. She says, so in addition to your story being amazing, she says, I could think I could get you in just based on the pure fact that we could recruit you. And she says, I don't want to lie to you and let you think that, that's going to be easy. She's like, but we do have spaces that we have to fill. And basically it was a quota situation, right?
Yeah.
And she says, but if you can handle that and you trust me, we can make this work. So I made my way to New York because my mother did have family up there. Went to visit the school, the pond, the ducks, the library. Oh my God, it was everything and more than what that broken, beat down catalog I had been carrying around for 3 years. And I was like, holy smoke, this is amazing. It was the best thing I'd ever seen. And they accepted me. And about a half a year later, about a semester or two later, I ended up moving up there, finding my way up there on the bus, making my way there. Moved into that dorm, didn't have anything except the stuff I'd stuffed in a pillowcase and a couple of old suitcases I had. Got there, they put me in a room, it was called a quad. So there were 3 other girls in the room with these 2 sets of bunk beds, and they had these amazing comforter sets and lamps and alarm clocks. And they had stacks of these fresh books on the desk and all that stuff. And I had none of that. I had no idea I even needed any of that stuff. So I took the jacket I was wearing and I stuffed that inside the pillowcase that I was using to carry my stuff in and used that as a pillow on a bed, no comforter. Ended up with a sheet that I borrowed from a girl next door. And then just tried to blend in and pretend that was okay. And so the RA came to the room like 2 days later after the orientations, and she said, where's your comforter and stuff? Where's your stuff? And I said, well, I don't have any stuff. I have an uncle who's gonna bring some stuff, just lying. I'm gonna bring the stuff. I haven't had a chance to go to the store yet. She's like, oh, there's a Kmart in town. You can go there. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Come the weekend, she showed up at my door and she said, you need to come with me. And she takes me to an old little storage room. And she says, whenever students leave and they leave stuff, we keep it here in the storage room. I need you to go in there and take some stuff that you need. So I was able to get a comforter, sheets, an alarm clock, an iron, just random stuff, you know what I mean? And I was embarrassed, but at the same time, I was motivated and I was like, okay, this is happening. I can do this. We can do this, right? And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And I was amazing in those classes. And I was surprised at how smart I actually was. And I was like, wow, I actually know stuff. This is crazy. Right. And a whole host of things were happening at the same time that was happening. My father was stalking me. My brother and sister were constantly telling me all the horrible things that were going on with them. I was trying to figure out ways that I could make it through. And I was digging deep and just saying, we got to do this for mom. We got to do this for mom. We got to do this for mom. Somehow or another, and definitely with the help of the people at that school, they saved my life. Food, clothing, secretly letting me stay in the dorm because they knew I didn't have any place to go during the breaks and the holidays, lining me up with jobs on campus, creating opportunities for me to meet people, and just trying to keep me in school because there were so many times I just wanted to quit and leave. Um, and I was struggling emotionally too, because once I was in that space, I'd say after maybe that first semester or so where it started to feel safe, I started having crazy bouts of PTSD.
Yeah.
I was snapping on people. I was shutting down at different times. There were strange things going on. I was having, I don't know, people would say things and it would trigger me. One of my roommates I thought was very spoiled and unappreciative of the things that she had. She would talk badly about her mother all the time. And that drove me crazy. And I just wanted to punch her in the face. So, because she would always complain, my mom didn't do this for me. My mom didn't buy me that. My mom, and I'd be like, I don't have a mom. You should shut up and treat your mom with respect. Just having these moments where everybody's like, what the hell is wrong with her? And so my psychology professor was also my academic advisor. And he told me, as a requirement for me being a psych major, that I was going to have to go and do counseling on campus. And he told me that everybody had to do this. And this was required because you can't really be a psychologist until you understand the process and go through therapy. And this is part of the learning and all that. So I went up there reluctantly, met this amazing counselor. Still remember her to this day, Andrea Winters. Don't know where she is or what's going on with her, but that woman was an amazing lifesaver who hung in there and stuck it out with me and took a lot of my crap to get me to a point where I needed to be so that I could actually start to process and deal with what was going on with me. Discovered that my professor had lied. It was not a requirement of students to go to the counseling center, but that was his way of trying to help me and get me the support that I needed. And so on so many levels, in so many ways, God was with me, the universe was with me, people were with me. And even when I was resisting and fighting it, I still kept feeling there was a pull. And I kept hearing my mother's words in my head: living well is the best revenge, living well is the best revenge. And I was like, I'm not going to let that son of a bitch and his creepy family, think they're going to get me, talking all that smack about my mom, putting these horrible rumors out about her, that she left and that she was a whore and she was no good, and all, anything they could put out there about her so that it would appear as if she left and that my father didn't do anything wrong, just besmirching her name, just the whole neighborhood talking about it. They ended up looting our house when we moved to my grandmother's. So everything we ever owned was gone, torn up, or burned. And it was just a mess. And so I just felt like, wow, we are just really, the universe is sticking it to us, right? But at the same time, there were all these other amazing things and opportunities opening up for me. Fast forward, a lot of years in between happened. And in 2019, 30 years later, due to my sister's nonstop efforts to try to find my mother, she found her. And it was another, in and of itself, its own crazy story, because she had been working for years. It's not that I had given up, but after so many years of not hearing anything and just trying to get on with my life, I had to find a way to just bury her and put her to rest, in my heart. And for me, I was always certain that she had died. My brother and my sister, not so much. Even my mother's siblings didn't. It hit them really hard in 2019 when they realized, oh shit, she's really gone. And it was almost like she had just died for them. For me, she died 30 years prior when she was gone, and she didn't come home after about a week or so, for me. And then me being able to have therapy and counseling and to process and be away from that situation, and having to deal with all the things I had to deal with, and build myself up in a way where I had to incorporate and integrate what had happened to me as being a part of me and not a separate thing, and understanding that I had to build from that. I feel like I had help in ways that a lot of my family did not. And so my sister was always looking for her, always searching. She'd be on these online sleuth pages, talking to people, reaching out to people and looking up cases. And she'd be calling the police and trying to follow up. And she tried to hire a private detective at one point, and there was a lot of stuff on. And that was her way of staying charged up. I'm going to find her. And she was on a search all the time. And she would be frustrated with me sometimes because she felt like I was not the same eager gotta find her, gotta figure it out, and not living my life because I'm just so focused on trying to find her, kind of a thing. Um, and at one point, she had an email that came across, and she said, "I got the weirdest email today." And I said, "What was it?" And she says, "I got it from one of these online sleuth people. And they said that they think they found something and they came across a case that they think might be related." And so she sent me the link that they sent her in the email. And I pull up the link, and it was almost like a Reddit thread of conversations between people talking. And it takes you to their webpage, and it's this Super Sleuth's webpage or whatever you want to call it. And I'm looking at the conversations, and I find that the conversation they're talking about, and they're talking about a woman that they are trying to identify. And they're like, "I'm telling you, this woman looks just like her. The picture from the newspaper, and we have to get in touch with her daughter. Her daughter had posted a picture a couple of years ago, and I'm telling you, the face on this woman, the lips," and they kept talking about the lips, the lips. And my mother had unique lips, so she had like a little cleft here and stuff. And they were like, "I need the face structure or something." And they're having this whole conversation. I'm like, "What is this about?" And she goes, "I don't know." She says, "But I got a private message saying that they want to talk to me because they think they found a woman who might be mom." And I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "I'm just telling you." And she was like, "I know it sounds crazy. I know you think these people are a bunch of, you know, they love death and they are." She's like, "But I'm telling you, these people find people. They find stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, let me know." About a week or two later, she calls me. She says, "Can you meet me at the local coffee shop? We got to talk." So I meet up with her and we talk, and she goes, "They sent me a picture. I have not opened it yet." She says, "But I want to read you the email." And in the email, the gentleman tells her that he saw her story and a couple of conversations that she had put out a couple of years ago. They find people, and they have a bunch of cases of people they're attempting to identify. These are John and Jane Does that they're trying to identify. And that's what they do. They try to help people to reunite these John and Jane Does with their families. And he says, "I need you to look at a picture, but I want to warn you, the person in the picture is deceased." He's like, "But I feel like the information you put up a couple of years ago, it's too much of a coincidence." He says, "This person that is in the picture was found around the time that you said your mother disappeared." Now, this person was found in New York, not in New Jersey. But I think it's worth looking at. And so she didn't look at it at the time. I didn't look at it at the time. And we agreed that we were going to take a couple of days. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Let's do it on Saturday." I said, I don't think I'm in a good place right now to look at this. And I said, "Do you think it's legit? Do you think it's real?" She goes, "I don't know. It's freaking me out." And she's like, "But I don't want to look at it by myself." And I said, "Okay, let's do it on Saturday." And I think it was like Thursday. It was like a couple of days. I go home, and later that night she calls me, bawling her eyes out. And she says, I couldn't help myself. I clicked the button." She said, "I think it's her." She said, "I think it's her." And I said, "Okay, I'm on my way." And I go to her house. She opens up the picture, and there's this woman, and it's just mostly her face. And she has sort of a white shroud over her head, and her body is wrapped up. And it's a picture of this woman in the morgue. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, "Oh my God, that's my mom. That's my mom." And we were like stunned. And she's like, "It's her." And so we contact this guy, and immediately the next day, we get contacted by a office within the University of North Texas. They have like a forensics office of some sort that helps to identify, unidentified people or something like that. And so we get a call from them because they're the ones who put up the website where these sleuths go to try to find these people. And so we tell them what we think, and he says, "Okay." He says, "Give me some more information. I'll get back to you." Later that day, we get a call from coroner's office in New York and a police detective on the phone. They ask us some more questions, and then they say, "Okay, here's the story of this Jane Doe. She was found on February 19th. It was during a heavy snowstorm. Body was found in Harlem in an alley. There was no identifying markers. She was in her underwear and a t-shirt, nothing, no personal information. During that time, because of the snowstorm and because of this and that and the third, we couldn't really identify her. She was sent to the morgue. She was there for about a week or so, and no one claimed her. They buried her in an unmarked grave." And I was like, "What is happening?" And I'm like, "Okay, the police in New Jersey were looking for her after about a week or so." And they're like, "Well, back then, 1989, the late 1980s, the police departments weren't always connected. They didn't have good record keeping. There was a lot of this and that going on. Da, 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 da. I'm so sorry. We're not 100% sure. We're going to pull her dental records. Does she have any identifying marks? Is there anything you can tell us about her? The coroner gets on the phone and we tell her that, my mom had a small, like a beauty mark over her top lip and some other things. And then I said, my mom had false teeth up front. My father had knocked her teeth out early on in her life. And so she had falsies. And I said, so the front four teeth she would take out. I said, so I don't know if that helps you. And she was like, that's good information. Thank you so much. She says, we still need to do an official dental records verification. I've already reached out to the police in New Jersey. They're sending me the file on your mom, and I'll get back to you. Literally the next day, she calls us back herself and she tells us, I'm so sorry, but we confirmed and this is your mom. And man, you would think in that situation that we would just bawl and start crying. Me and my sister were so relieved. She cried, but she was laughing at the same time. It was such a relief that after 30 years, we had an answer, we had an answer. And it was such an odd, surreal feeling because in addition to dealing with all the abuse and all of those horrible things that happened, we also had to deal with losing someone and not knowing what happened to them and deal with that trauma as well, and man, it was just this sort of shocking, weird, and then my sister, it took her a minute, it took her about an hour, and then she started bawling. And she was so upset and she cried and cried and cried. And she cried the way she cried when she was younger, when my mom first disappeared. And I was holding her and then I started to cry. And it was just this really strange experience for us because, my God, it had been so long and we thought we were literally going to leave this earth not ever knowing what happened to our mom, and it's such a weird thing because even though in the back of your mind, you have this strange, weird hope that maybe she did leave. Maybe she figured out a way to get away and maybe she's living a good life somewhere and she just couldn't get in touch with us or something, something. But then when you finally know the truth, it just hits you like a landslide, a ton of bricks. And then there's all these different thoughts and emotions and feelings. And then it became anger.
Yeah. Because
we called the coroner back to get some more information. And the stuff that she told us was even more kind of confusing and shocking. And she told us that there was some shoddy police work done on the time they thought my mother was a Jane Doe. They did not really reach out and do contacts and connect neighboring cities. They could have called New Jersey and Philadelphia looking for missing persons or things like that. They didn't do that. She said, this is going to sound very odd. She said, and keep in mind, this is before my time, because she was young. She was like, this is before my time. But she says, based on the report and everything, it doesn't seem like they did a lot of trying to identify or searching. And she says, and this happened a lot, she says, during that time. And she says, keep in mind also, one of the things that was happening in New York at that time was what was happening with the Central Park Five and the woman that was raped at that time. She says, any and all murders and homicides that took place, especially if they took place in places like Harlem, which at the time was a dumping ground for people, and in Harlem, they had a lot of prostitution, a lot of drug usage, things like that. So when they found people there, they just assumed prostitute, drug addict, murder victim, why bother? They're all killing each other anyway. So she says, so if you were planning to do something to someone and you wanted to get rid of a body and it was a body of a person of color, you would put them there, right? And she said, and they did not do very much at all to find or search. And so they just kind of wrote it off. And she told us that in the notes, they had even written in the police notes that of the Jane Doe that possible prostitute, possible drug use, never thinking that that was a mother of three who was hardworking and that people were looking for her. And so that on and of itself is a whole other story, but that just made me angry. That made me sad and it made me angry on a level, not just as a woman, but as a person of color. And the sense that someone could murder someone and throw someone away and that nobody would care and nobody would think that they had anybody looking for them. And that just broke my heart all over again.
Well, it's like they're thrown away twice, right?
Yes,
That's
very much
basically
so.
what they're thrown away twice.
Yes, very much so. And that just blew my mind because now as an adult woman with children of my own, I'm thinking, what the hell? What's happening in this world, you know? And then you add on to it and I say, okay, where is she? What happened? And they said, well, when no one claims them, we cremate them and then we bury them. And then she told us where she was buried. And so she was, and this, I swear the story gets weirder and weirder. So she was buried in a small island in New York where they bury people who are unclaimed. And I can't remember the name of it right now. Forgive me, it escapes me. And they cremate her, and or so she said it was something was off with the cremation records, right? She says, we believe she was cremated, but it was so long ago and the record keeping was so shoddy. So he says they cremated her and it looks like she's buried at this place. There's this island, right? And she says, but she says that sounds weird to me because on that island they don't cremate them. They bury them, but they bury them in mass graves. So there's an island in New York. There's a graveyard where they bury you and they put unmarked graves and then they bury you. And she says, there's two numbers here. There's one for a cremation number and a location, but there's also a mass grave number 109 on this island. And I'm like, mass grave? Wait, what are we talking about? And so she's telling me this process they have in New York where they have an island where if you go unclaimed, before they were doing cremations, they would just bury you and they'd bury about 10 to 15 adults in the same grave and sometimes 20 to 25 children in the same grave. And they'd mark that grave. And so after some digging and some researching, she called us a couple of days later and she says she's buried in this grave with this grave number. She says, but there's a problem. There was a major hurricane here and that island was pretty much damn near destroyed. And I will find that information and share it with you later, but I looked that up too. And the bodies and some of the graves on that island were brought. There's a major hurricane. I can't remember the name of the hurricane. It was a big hurricane and it happened in like 2014, 2015 in New York. And that whole area was destroyed. And so what they were doing was they had pulled all of the bodies who had come up and they'd had to redo these graves and they put them in these storage sheds that they had set up until they could find a way to go back and repair and there's a name for it and put them back in the ground, reinturn them or something like that.
Reinter,
Yeah, like reinter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Reinterment, something like that. So then she said, I know this sounds horrific. She says, but believe it or not, our chances of finding her might be better because of this. And she was right. About a week later, she came back to us and she says, we found her. She says she wasn't cremated. She was buried in one of those graves that had to be pulled up. She was in one of the sheds and they identified her. And so we paid to have them cremate her and they sent her to my sister. My sister received her ashes. But man, it was the wildest roller coaster. There's so many twists and turns to the story. I kid you guys not. There's so many twists and turns. There's so many things that I still now talking about it today. I still haven't fully wrapped my head around and been able to process all of it, in the way that makes sense. But my sister received her ashes. We had the conversation we had to have with our family members on her side of the family, who we were separated from for so long. We didn't think these people cared for us because we didn't know these people, because she, being a victim of abuse, he did not allow us to connect with her side of the family. And in fact, when she first disappeared and her brothers and sisters came down to check in and talk, he scared the shit out of them. They were
So like he isolated her from her family and from you
exactly.
guys. Yeah. So you had no relationship with them because of him.
Absolutely. When I was on my own and I was in college, I never thought to try to reach out to these people. I never thought to contact them or call them or anything because they didn't really call me and we were so isolated from them that I felt like, well, if they're not reaching out to us, they must not really care.
Yeah.
Or they didn't
That wasn't
care.
it at all. Yeah.
Because why didn't they help my mom? I know she lied a lot to them when we were
They're
younger
probably
about things.
terrified.
But
I mean,
they were
like
terrified.
they didn't know the full story. And he probably made threats against them. I mean, he probably lied.
Sure.
And
he was a scary son of a bitch, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yes. And they were, and they apologize now to this day for not being there for us, for not trying harder, for not putting in more effort than what they did. They felt helpless and lost. When we told them that she was found and we had to share that picture,
Mm.
most of them broke down like it had just happened. Like they didn't believe it or didn't know until that when it happened. And so they're all telling us how sorry they are and they want to comfort us. And we're like, we're good. Our mother is found and we're going to bring her home and we're going to tell all those pieces of shit back in Pleasantville, New Jersey, who said she was a whore and that she left us and that she was no good and believed it and didn't help us and didn't support her. Even the women in that neighborhood that were supposedly her friends who were aware of what she had went through totally disappeared on us. And I understand, looking at it from a child's eyes, yes, I felt some type of way about that. Looking at it as an adult, I understand the fear, the uncertainty,
Sure.
the discomfort of not knowing what to do. But not, I mean, but in all my times of couch surfing, there were some people that I thought I stayed on strangers' couches because the people in the neighborhood who knew us didn't want me there because they didn't want to upset my father. So
Right.
I still have some kind of anger about that. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Sure,
people
of
stand
course.
up, damn it. Stand
Yeah.
up for people.
Somebody stand
So
up to him. Yeah.
yes, so there's so much stuff to this story, that just blows my mind. And like I said, I feel like her story should have been my story that I'm living now. I think about her and I think about how amazing and funny she was. And I see her now, when you see your mom as your child, it's just your mom. She is the mom. She doesn't really want to be anything but your mom. And she even told me that one time. I remember asking her, I remember coming home from school one time, it was middle school, and we were talking about our futures and what we want to be, what we want to do. And I said, Mom, what'd you want to be when you grew up? And she got so mad at me. She was so upset with me, and I didn't understand why she was so mad at me for asking her that. And she goes, I'm doing what the hell I wanted to do right now. I'm your mother. That's what I wanted to be. And I was like, didn't you want to be like a singer? And she used to love to sing. And she would sing the old Motown songs and she would love to dance. And I'm like, did you want to be like a dancer or something? She goes, shut the hell up. I don't want to be any of that. I want to be your mother. Shut up. And that just
What was
always
your
blew me
name? What
away.
was her first name?
Viola. And actually, her name was Ola, but she changed it to Viola because she thought Ola was too country. So Viola Althea Legree, but
Oh,
man, she was amazing
love
and
that.
funny and awesome. And it just broke my heart because thinking about that now, I know she did want to be something. She wanted to do and be something. And whatever that was no longer an option for her. And so when I think about her saying, living well is the best revenge. Oh, it's raining outside. You got to go to school. Living well is the best revenge. Just go to school. Go do this. Go do that. And I'm thinking, man, living well. I mean, I'm not big on revenge. I'm big on just living well. But for me, I get it. You know what I mean? Just living. Man, the other day, my son caught me crying in the kitchen. He goes, "What's the matter, Mom? What's the matter?" And I said, "Dang it, that daggone Kathy Bates got me." I saw an interview with Kathy Bates.
Oh, when she cried about her mom.
Yes, did you see that?
I heard
Yes,
about it.
I saw that, and I'm like, what is going on with Kathy Bates? I watched her new show, Matlock. So, and then they had all this Kathy Bates stuff out there, and I see that article of her, and she's telling a story about her mom and how her mom and dad sacrificed so much for her, to be in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And her mom gave up a lot, and her mom was like a homemaker and just did everything they could to put her in school so she could follow her dream. And
Yeah.
she said when she was up for the Oscar for Misery,
Misery. Yeah.
yeah, that her mom was like, I don't know what the big deal is. It's not like you cured cancer or something. So what? And she was like, what the heck, Mom? And she's like, her mom was always kind of like, so what? Always trying to keep her, humble
Humble.
or whatever.
Oh,
She always thought
Yeah.
that maybe her mom wanted to do something, you know what I mean? And couldn't do it. And so she said, my biggest regret is that I didn't thank my mom when I got that Oscar. And the interviewer said, you did thank her. And she goes, no, I didn't. She goes, yes, you did. And she goes, no, you look it up. You'll see I didn't thank her. He goes, we did look it up. And he says, and we'll look it up right now. And then they show her because she never went back to watch any of her Oscar speeches.
Oh.
And she thanks her mother. And when she sees herself do that, she's like, oh, and she just gasps. And then she starts crying and she thanks him. And she says, my God, I've lived all this time regretting and thinking I never thanked that woman for one of the biggest moments in my life. She says, and it's just, she says, oh my God, this is such a relief. And then he goes, why is this so important to you? And she said, and this is what got me, she said, because I feel like she should have been living my life. She says, when she died, I kept saying, I want your spirit to come into me so that you can experience and live some of the amazing things that I'm living and experiencing because you deserve that. and didn't get that. She says, so I feel like I'm living for her. I want her to experience that. And I just broke down because I've had a lot of good things happen in my life since all the bad stuff. And I struggled a great deal for a long time with survivor's guilt. And I think about my mom, and sometimes I hear her voice, or sometimes I say something and I remind myself of her, and I think, man, and I do things, and I'm like, man, Vi would have loved this, or Vi would have gone crazy about this, or Vi, and I think, my God, man, I wish this woman could have been here, to experience these things with me and through me.
What did I say what did I say in the chat when you gave this presentation? I said, she is here.
Yes, I remember that. Yes, that's right. And it just, man, I don't know.
She's here. I mean,
I have to believe that, because I swear to you, there were some times when I look back on some things and I'm thinking, how the hell did I make it through that? How did I get through that? I can't believe I made it through that. And I know that was my mom with me.
Yeah.
That eagerness, that desire I had to survive for her, because I didn't think it was fair what happened to her. And I was like, I'm not going to let her down by letting that shit happen to me. I'm going to make sure I live for her.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is her way of helping me survive, and get through it and help other people get through it. And so for me, man, it's been quite a journey.
And look, I mean, honestly, look at what you're doing now. This is what's so interesting about life, right? Like, you had your experience and you came to WGU to like give that talk because you knew, so-and-so from a different situation earlier in life. And then you spoke at WGU, and then I'm in the talk, because of whatever. And then I've got this, and then you come into here. And, and just like the wheels keep like turning. Right.
Yes.
And so absolutely. Like her life was absolutely not in vain. What happened to her was absolutely not in vain. And now you're here talking about it. And tell Katie the best part about discovering your mother's remains and what you ended up doing with them and where you moved them to.
Yes, we moved them to South Carolina and had her buried next to her parents. We sent her back home, which is what, and even sometimes when he was beating her and she was going through it, she'd be crying and she'd cry out for her mother.
Yeah.
And there was a time when my grandmother was alive, but she never told her what was going on. She never told her, and she rarely, if ever, went back home. And so having her go through all she went through and then be basically thrown away and then put into an unmarked grave for pretty much 30 years and not have her name, not have a home, not be home and resting, to be able to get her back to South Carolina and back next to her parents and back home where she's loved and cared for was everything for us. Is everything for us. Because even during the time that she was missing, I felt like she's not resting. Her name is not, they don't know where she is. Her name is being besmirched. I don't know where she is. I cried a lot because I kept thinking, I don't know where he put her. And all I kept thinking was she was someplace cold and sad and horrifying,
So they did conclude that
they did determine that it was your father.
Yes. So they started doing more investigation and all that, but by the time we found her, he had passed on. Okay. But a lot of the information they had gotten from the witnesses, a lot of the things that they had been able to put together the years after, and then after looking at the autopsy, looking at the information from the Jane Doe, and they were like, okay, there was too much evidence, there were too many remnants and things that they found with her, that they're like, yeah, it was him. But by that time, no justice, no peace, Yeah.
Listen, I kind of do believe, like, like universally speaking, higher power speaking, whatever, that he got his punishment and your mother got her justice.
Yeah.
I do believe that. I think that
life was not kind to him towards the end. And so at the end of the day,
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I would love to, I apologize, I have to go. I always have a hard stop because I I'm just doing
Understood.
another thing on
Dinner,
my own.
done.
Yeah,
I
so
gotta
do
do
I.
dinner and
Yeah, yeah. of
would you
course.
come back and share with us? I'm still digesting your story. Would you come join
Right.
us again and share, how you got where you're at? I mean, so much
Yeah,
more to share. I mean, I
absolutely.
that
We
would be
want to do
fantastic.
like maybe if we can find a good time, next episode would be like Q&A
Yeah,
and Katie absolutely picking you apart with
absolutely. No,
Oh, I'm not
absolutely.
that brutal. You make me
Absolutely.
No, I know you've got lots of questions.
Yeah,
Katie's got a mind that works pretty
yeah,
fast. So
yeah.
I know
that
for
would
Katie,
be.
this is like taking this all in. And now I know you probably are just like gonna write down
I
like,
have
Yeah,
lots of
yeah.
questions. Yeah.
But
And
I would
Yeah,
absolutely do that because I feel like that
thank you.
is it's the devil's in the details, so to speak. And
yeah.
when I help people, I think a lot of how I did some of the things I was able to do, overcome some of the things I overcame, is where the true help is. So
I
absolutely.
totally
You
agree.
also
And I
need to
told
write a
this
book. This because this is
Everybody says that.
wow. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
totally agree. And like when I was listening to this the first time, and I won't keep it much longer, Katie, because then you have to go and I have to do stuff too. But like when I heard this story originally, and when you got to the part about Pace University and what those people did
yeah,
for you, I was like in tears
Yeah.
because I think I put it in the chat because I was totally over emotional. And I was like, you don't realize how many strangers will help you.
yes,
Right? It's
yes.
the strangers that come in,
But you
like
have
you
to
It
said,
be
is.
you have to be transparent. You have to be vulnerable, and those are scary things to do.
They are, and
sometimes
it
people
wasn't
just, they
easy.
see it, right? They see it and they
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
okay. And you said sometimes there was food left at your door or there
Yes.
was clothes just left. Like
Yes.
it's those people out there
Mhm.
Yeah.
that they don't want any recognition. They don't even really
Yes.
want to have a conversation. What they do is they
Yeah.
come up, they do, and they go. And
Yes.
the Pace University story is the one that gets me
Yeah. It
every
was
time.
amazing. And
Every
trust
time.
me, in the beginning, I was defensive about it. I'm like, I don't need that. Why are
I'm
you doing
sure.
that?
Yeah.
Why
And
don't
that's
feel
why they
sorry for me? I'm
kind
not
of
a
like
charity case.
Yeah.
You know,
And
snuck
it
but
sounds like
around
that they
and
really
like,
found a way to be very gentle with your pride,
yes.
I
They
think
were,
it's
which is
beautiful.
yes,
that's a
I
skill
think it's
set
beautiful,
in
it is
itself.
honestly.
because I mean, there were
Yeah.
times they were doing things for me I didn't even realize doing things for me because they wanted to protect them. You know, they wanted to protect my sense of pride, my sense of dignity,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
was so important. There were
What a
times I
gift.
lied and said I wasn't hungry, or I lied and said I had what I needed and I didn't. And people didn't say, "Oh, okay, well, you're good then. I'm walking up." They didn't quit. They were like, "Okay, well, if you don't have to take it, but I'm going to leave this here. If you don't want it, you give it to somebody else." I'm like, "Okay," and then they leave, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm taking this. I
Okay,
need
I'm
this."
taking that.
So,
Yeah.
and then, like you said, just leaving things under my door or
Yeah.
leaving things by the
Yeah.
door for me or things like that. Not always. A lot of times I didn't know who it was from.
Yeah. And it was best
And
not to know, because then if you
It's
felt
not
that you
just,
owed somebody back, then yeah.
yes,
and they didn't want you to feel that. They just wanted to help.
no, yeah, it was beautiful. I swear I still
Love
donate
that.
money as much as I can when I can. But I tell you, if I ever hit the lottery or something, if I get $1 million, they get half. That's how valuable that
That's
place
awesome.
was to me, and how important that place was to me. And it
Yeah.
had nothing to do with the education. The
Right.
education was great. It had
Yeah.
nothing to do with the education. It had
Well, that was an
everything to do with
education in
them.
itself, what happened
Yes. Yeah.
besides the
Yes.
education, right? So
Absolutely.
Stephanie,
Yeah.
100%
I
wants you to
have to
come
go.
back.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will. I
Yeah,
will.
absolutely. Yeah. I've
I
got a
will.
ton of questions, and I'm just so taken by your story and your strength. And yeah, and there's so much to
Let's
learn from the healing, right? And the
Yes.
journey and
Oh
how
my
we get
gosh.
to the
let's
Yes.
other side.
schedule that then.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
get
Do
I'll
your scheduling
I'll
magic,
do my
Helen.
thing.
Yes.
I'll do my thing.
Yes.
Thank you so
You got
much.
me. Thank you
Love it.
Thank
guys.
you so much. Thank you so much. Really,
Absolutely love
Stephanie,
it.
really
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much, Stephanie.
You're welcome,
And
but I want to
everyone,
thank you. I appreciate it so much. Thank you guys.
thank
Yeah.
you.
The
All
work
right.
you're doing is
And we'll
fantastic.
see you again real soon.
Real soon.
Actually, yes, we will.
Okay.
Yay.
Yes, we will.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Have a
Take
good night.
care.
You
Bye.
too. You
Bye.
too.